He held black belts in 3 disciplines, but today he wasn't here to spar. He stepped into the Royal Guard's marching line, just to force a reaction. That's how it started. But what the Royal Guard did next? It wasn't in the manual, and no one expected what happened after that. Want the full story? First, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Now let's dive in. Horse Guards Parade basked beneath a brittle London sun, the kind that promises warmth but delivers only light. The pale gravel shimmered with early afternoon stillness, not a stillness of peace, but of anticipation. Tourists lined the black railings 3 deep, leaning forward with that mix of reverence and impatience that comes from witnessing something ancient in our instant gratification world. Camera phones held high, children hoisted onto shoulders. No voices, just murmurs rippling through the crowd, like they all somehow knew something sacred was underway. The sound came first, not music, but boots. Dozens of them, pounding in perfect rhythm against centuries-old stone. It echoed through the square like a heartbeat, steady and sharp and somehow alive. This wasn't just a march. It was memory made physical, history with a pulse. The Queen's Life Guard appeared at the far arch, a vision in scarlet and gold that stopped conversations mid-sentence. They moved like one creature stitched from red tunics and gleaming sabres, a single organism breathing in unison. They advanced in deliberate sequence, bearskin hats casting long shadows across the courtyard. Each step was ceremonial, yes, but not for show, never just for show. This was obligation rendered in motion, duty given weight. And then, from the left flank of the crowd, something shifted. It happened so quickly that most tourists didn't register it at first. A man in a dark t-shirt and athletic joggers ducked beneath the rope barrier with quiet intent. No fuss, no shout, not even a glance around to see if anyone was watching, though plenty were. He moved with fluid precision, not in a rush, but not unsure either. His hands swung loosely at his sides, his breathing measured and calm. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He was coming toward them. Gasps scattered through the crowd like pebbles across ice. A tourist dropped her phone with a clatter. 2 children were pulled behind their mother's back, her hands tightening instinctively on their shoulders. But the man, he didn't flinch at the attention. Didn't seem to notice it, even. He looked forward, not at the guards, but through them, like they were scenery he was passing on the way to something more important. His pace matched their cadence precisely, as if he'd been rehearsing this moment for years. Lance Corporal Gregory Ames, 3rd from the left in the formation, registered the man without turning his head. The movement registered in his periphery, but it hit the center of his focus like a bullet finding its target. He knew instantly this wasn't a drunken dare or a wayward wanderer stumbling into the wrong place. This was deliberate, calculated, personal. The man came to a stop, dead center of the route, planting his feet with the confidence of someone who had stood his ground before. The lifeguard column was 20 meters out and closing fast, 40 boots striking in perfect rhythm, the distance shrinking with each heartbeat. Still, no movement from Gregory, no signal to his comrades, no reaction that anyone watching could detect. But he'd already begun the internal calculation that combat veterans know too well: stance, balance, breathing rate, gaze. The man stood like someone trained to fight, not to threaten. His weight distributed evenly. Shoulders relaxed but ready, eyes focused but not fixed. And that in itself was the threat. Not aggression, but preparation. His name was Kane Maddox, 35. Once a promising infantry recruit, with a bright future in special operations, now a martial artist and private instructor who kept mostly to himself in a small flat outside London. He hadn't posted about this on social media, hadn't warned anyone, hadn't live-streamed his approach or made a TikTok about his intentions. But here he was, standing in the path of tradition, waiting. He didn't smirk, he didn't speak. He simply locked into position, shoulder-width stance, spine loose but grounded, hands open at his sides, the stance of someone who doesn't need to make a fist to be dangerous. The guards closed the gap in synchronized silence. Gregory kept his rifle upright and his gaze locked straight ahead, just as he had done through 1,000 drills, 100 ceremonies, 4 combat tours. Stillness, sound, pressure building like a storm. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. Not yet. But something was about to give. Before the gravel, before the red tunics and tourists, Kane Maddox had worn a different kind of uniform. He joined the British Army at 21, not because of family legacy or national pride, but because he needed somewhere to put the pressure that had built up inside him like a fault line. He had grown up outside Derby, in a house where silence came in different forms, his father's cold distance, his mother's quiet desperation, and the slow throb of disappointment that seemed to seep through the walls. The army had given him structure, breathable discipline, purpose that didn't need to be questioned every morning. He took to it quickly. He was fit, focused, a natural athlete with the kind of explosive strength that made obstacle courses look like playgrounds. His instructors had marked him as a natural, the kind of recruit who stayed alert when others coasted, who pushed hardest when everyone else slowed down. He didn't speak much, but he didn't need to. He followed orders to the letter. Except once. It happened during a patrol in Helmand, routine clearance near the edge of the green zone. A few loose rooftops, quiet streets, that awful sense of calm that always came before it shattered. He and his unit had split to cover 2 alleys that forked from the main road, a textbook maneuver they'd executed dozens of times. Kane's best friend, Corporal Callum Hurst, took the northern side with 3 others. A comms failure, later blamed on equipment, not personnel, left Kane pinned and out of reach when the radio finally sparked with the words, "No soldier wants to hear. Contact north, multiple wounded." By the time Kane got there, pushing through crossfire and smoke, it was too late. Callum bled out behind a crumbled door frame, with no one to carry him out. Just radio static and dust settling on his open eyes. After that, something frayed in Kane, something essential. He finished his contract in silence, demobilized quietly, and never looked back. But the stillness that came afterward, the absence of orders, the civilian vacuum, made his mind restless, loud, unbearable. He couldn't forget the sound of boots crunching dirt as he ran toward Callum. Couldn't forget how quickly ceremony vanished when blood hit the dust. Couldn't outrun the knowledge that sometimes protocol was just pretty wrapping on a coffin. PTSD came like a slow flood, not all at once. No fireworks, no screaming nightmares that made for dramatic stories. Just small moments that unspooled him. The wrong smell in a cafe. A child dropping a toy with too sharp a sound. The silence of dawn when he couldn't sleep. He didn't go public, didn't blame the army or seek compensation. But the rituals, the medals, the pomp, the headlines about "our brave boys" began to feel like masks over graves. And that was harder to carry than the war itself. So he turned to something older than uniform. Body discipline. He trained every day. Martial arts first, karate, then jiu-jitsu, then wrestling. Not to hurt, to quiet the mind, to build walls again, with muscle and bone instead of silence, to feel solid in a world that had become too fluid, too unpredictable. Later came cooking, of all things. It soothed him. The measured steps, the control of temperature, the clean repetition, stirring something until it thickened, until it transformed, making something nourishing from raw elements. It was almost like building a shelter every night. But the silence still remained, the quiet between disciplines, the part of him that still wanted to say something without speaking. So he'd chosen today, not for an audience, but for a reason. He wasn't there to fight the soldiers. He wasn't there to expose anyone or to become viral content. He was there to challenge what had broken him and to see if it would hold when met with something real. Lance Corporal Gregory Ames knew the gravel by feel, how it shifted under your heel when the sun baked it dry, how it dragged just slightly at your boots if you didn't lift clean and sharp. He knew the weight of the bearskin hat in high heat, the itch of the chin strap when sweat began to pool beneath it like a second skin. He knew how to stand still when the world around him itched for movement. Gregory didn't join the military for spectacle. He didn't come from hardship or trauma. His parents were alive, married, quiet people who still lived in the same cottage where he'd grown up. His upbringing in rural Devon was uneventful in the best sense. A childhood marked by open fields and clear rules. But something in him always sought structure. He liked building things with his hands, smoothing rough surfaces, fixing what came loose. So when his mate from school left for Sandhurst and came back standing straighter, speaking cleaner, somehow more himself, something clicked. Gregory enlisted at 19, infantry first, because he wanted to know the ground before anything else. 4 tours, 2 in Afghanistan. He never considered himself special, just steady. The kind of soldier who didn't complain when the orders were hard, who stayed awake without being asked, who checked his kit twice even when there was no time. The kind who made tea for everyone after a bad day without discussing why the day had been bad. He didn't talk about the hard parts. About the 2 friends lost in a single week to an IED that shouldn't have been there. About the long march back from a village that turned hostile after a wedding bombing that wasn't their fault but became their burden. He never cried in front of anyone. He just kept moving. Eventually, ceremonial duty came, a rotation most soldiers took as rest or reward, an easy posting, a break from the real work. But for Gregory, it wasn't a retreat. It was responsibility. He didn't wear the red tunic for tourists or for Instagram. He wore it for the ones who didn't come home. He'd memorized the weight of history, the years behind each parade, the men buried whose names were never spoken during the changing of the guard. The job wasn't to perform, it was to carry. So when Kane Maddox stepped out onto that gravel, Gregory didn't flinch. He felt the man before he even truly saw him. Something in the air changed, like a tight wire pulled too far. He didn't turn his head, didn't let his eyes shift, but his awareness locked in. This wasn't drunken chaos or a dare for social media. This was different, calculated, intentional. Gregory registered the stance immediately, shoulders loose but not slack, weight balanced evenly across the balls of the feet, hands open, not clenched, not a threat, a challenge. He didn't respond, because that's not what was required, yet. He'd learned that in Helmand, too. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was wait one more breath before acting. Stillness wasn't weakness. It was containment. Gregory focused forward, but every cell was listening. He could hear Kane's measured steps, could hear the rhythm of the other boots around him, unbroken. So long as the line held, the line meant something. But he also knew this wasn't just ceremonial anymore. Something was coming. He didn't know what. Only that if it came to him, he'd meet it not with fury, but with clarity. Not to prove anything, only to protect what deserved to be protected. The march continued. 40 boots rising and falling in faultless unison, the cadence echoing off centuries-old stone. But tension had crept into the air, even if no one admitted it. A security guard at the perimeter reached for his radio, then hesitated, watching. Kane Maddox walked beside the formation now, not directly inside the line, but close, uncomfortably close. His steps matched the beat, not in mockery, but in deliberate sync, as if daring them to acknowledge his presence. No one spoke. The guards kept eyes front. Tourists watched with a kind of anxious awe, unsure whether they were witnessing history or an arrest in progress. A father pulled his phone down, suddenly uncertain if this was something that should be recorded. Kane didn't perform for the cameras. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't posturing or shouting slogans. His face was a mask of concentration. He was watching Gregory Ames. He moved parallel to the formation, waiting for a crack in the shield, for any sign that the stillness was just pretense, that underneath it all, these men were just actors in expensive costumes. 40 degrees in the desert, he murmured, just loud enough for the guards beside him to hear. You know what you learn? That nobody in command comes for you when it gets ugly. It's just you and your mate bleeding out behind a wall. No response. The rifles remained at the shoulder. Boots never broke rhythm. He moved closer, almost brushing Gregory's shoulder now. His voice dropped lower, intimate as a confession. You remember Lashkar Gah? He whispered. I do. I remember shouting into static. I remember no one coming. I remember dirt turning to mud under my knees. Stillness. I bet you've been told to forget. Told that's not what this uniform is about. Gregory said nothing, but something in his posture stiffened, just enough, a tension in the shoulders, a tightening at the jaw. Imperceptible to most, but to another soldier, it was a flare in the night. Kane stepped ahead, cutting across the front of the formation. The crowd audibly gasped. A woman covered her child's eyes. An American tourist muttered, "Is he trying to get himself killed?" while his wife filmed everything. Kane turned, walking backwards in front of the advancing guards, his gaze fixed on Gregory. "You know why I'm here," he said, "because I've had enough of pretending." His voice rose slightly, no longer just for Gregory. "They told us we were warriors. Then they dressed us like ornaments, taught us drills, ceremonies, made us stand still while the world turned, while our friends died, while nothing changed." The soldiers reached him. Another few seconds and they would either collide or be forced to stop. Kane didn't move. His eyes locked with Gregory's for the first time, not challenging now, searching, looking for something human behind the discipline. The sergeant major's voice barked through the square. "Halt!" Boots froze in place. The sound was deafening in its suddenness. Kane stood in the middle of the route, arms loose, shoulders high. For the first time he looked small, alone. A man against a wall of tradition. "This is it, yeah?" he called out. "The sacred line, step out of it and the sky falls." He walked straight up to Gregory again, face to face. No performance now, just proximity. "I bled with people who never got remembered," he said quietly. "And now I'm supposed to bow to uniforms, like it means something?" Gregory didn't blink. "You lot say you're tradition, but you're forgetting what it was built on." And then he stepped aside, just a bit, and pressed the tip of his finger against Gregory's rifle barrel. Not hard, barely a touch. A line had been crossed, not physically, symbolically. The square was silent except for the faint sound of cameras clicking, the wind shifting gravel. Kane whispered, "Come on, show me there's still a man behind the mask." He didn't know it yet, but he'd just asked the wrong man the right question. Time slowed. That was the thing about silence. It didn't mean stillness. It meant pressure. It meant everything waiting for one person to decide. Kane Maddox stood with his finger lightly touching the tip of Gregory's rifle, not pushing, not striking, just enough to whisper, "I crossed the line. What will you do now?" Gregory didn't react at first, didn't blink. His eyes stayed fixed ahead, as if Kane was still part of the background noise he was trained to ignore. But that wasn't true anymore. A royal guard doesn't move unless ordered, doesn't flinch, doesn't acknowledge, unless the sanctity of his post is challenged beyond the bounds of ceremony. This, what Kane had done, wasn't protest. It wasn't harmless theatre. It was trespass with intent. Gregory breathed in, slow and deep, through his nose, not to steady himself, to mark the moment, to feel the threshold. Then, smoothly, with mechanical grace, he moved. The shift was so clean, it seemed rehearsed. But it wasn't. There was no protocol for this. No page in the manual. He stepped one pace forward, rifle still held upright, boots placing perfectly, just one soldier breaking formation by choice. The line behind him did not follow. They stayed still, eyes forward, a living wall. Gregory turned. Now he faced Kane directly. The two men stood maybe 6 feet apart. The crowd, now entirely silent, leaned forward without realizing it. A child whispered a question and was quickly hushed. Gregory removed his bearskin hat, slowly, carefully. The movement was deliberate, ceremonial in its own way. The wind touched his cropped hair as he lowered the hat to his side, holding it with the same precision he'd hold a folded flag. Kane raised an eyebrow but didn't smirk. There was something in Gregory's eyes that made sarcasm feel inappropriate, something old, like stone that remembered fire. "You got something to say?" Gregory asked, his voice level, low, and unmistakably trained. Not angry, not even challenging, just present. Kane nodded once. "I said it already. You're not a fighter anymore. You're a costume, a silhouette." Gregory took a step forward. "Then let's see if that's true." Kane didn't flinch, but his body shifted slightly. not backing down, recalculating. Gregory didn't raise his fists, didn't square into a boxer's stance. Instead, he said quietly, "You wanted to test the silence. Let's see what happens when it answers." Kane let out a breath. "So, we're doing this?" Gregory nodded once. No theatrics, no posturing. And then he moved. Not fast, not wild, controlled. He didn't punch. He closed the distance, dropped his center of gravity, and executed a textbook takedown. A grappling move designed not to hurt, but to humble. Kane went down with a grunt. Not hard, not brutal, but undeniable. He hit the gravel, his elbow catching most of the weight. Dust rose. The phones in the crowd wobbled as they tried to capture it. But the cameras didn't matter now. Gregory stood above him, placing his bearskin hat gently back on his head. He didn't look smug. He looked centered. Kane lay still for a second, processing. When he looked up, he met Gregory's eyes and saw no rage, no pride, just discipline. A wall that had briefly opened and then closed again. Gregory stepped back into formation, just like that. The sergeant major didn't give an order. He didn't need to. The platoon began to march again, boots pounding the gravel with renewed rhythm. Kane sat up slowly, brushing gravel from his palms. He wasn't injured, but he'd lost something. And Gregory had said more with movement than Kane had said with words. The parade didn't miss a beat. As soon as Gregory rejoined the line, the march resumed. Boots striking gravel in perfect cadence, red tunics swaying as though nothing had happened. But something had. Kane Maddox sat on the ground, propped on one elbow, eyes following the departing guards. He wasn't winded, wasn't bruised, but he didn't stand right away either. He had come expecting resistance, maybe aggression, maybe even arrest. He'd even entertained the idea of being tackled to the ground by multiple guards, manhandled off the premises while tourists gasped and security swarmed. That, at least, would have confirmed the enemy in his mind, the over-disciplined system, reacting to disruption like a clenched fist. But what he got was different. A single, clean response. Technical, controlled, not violent, but definitive. And in that moment, the narrative slipped out of his grasp. He hadn't been silenced by rage. He had been shown discipline in motion. The crowd behind the rope was still quiet. No cheers, no jeers, just stares, wide eyes. A few mouths hung slightly open, as though they were still waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Milo, his student, had stopped filming from the edge of the crowd. He lowered his phone slowly, forgetting to stop the recording. Not because the moment wasn't dramatic, but because it had outgrown the frame. Kane finally pushed himself up, dusted his palms on his joggers. And for the first time in years, he felt the heat of being alone, in a space he didn't understand. And it wasn't humiliation, it was revelation. He had spent years perfecting technique, mastering breath, rehearsing discipline in private dojos and gyms, but he'd forgotten what it looked like when lived in public. Not for admiration, but for service. Gregory had moved because something sacred had been touched, not his pride, something older. And Kane, through all his pain and resistance, recognized it. It was the same thing he'd felt in Helmand, in those moments when training overcame fear, when discipline wasn't a show, but a shield. He turned, walking off the gravel slowly, no longer seeking the camera's eye. The crowd parted to let him through, some with disapproval, some with fascination. An elderly man, medals pinned to his blazer, nodded once as Kane passed, a gesture neither of approval nor condemnation, just acknowledgement. Kane nodded back. Sometimes lessons come from unlikely teachers. Back in the barracks, the atmosphere was steady, almost mechanical. Tunics were being brushed, weapons returned to lockers, boots polished even though they already gleamed. Gregory moved without comment. He hung his uniform with the same attention he'd shown on parade. There were no glances, no whispers behind his back, only quiet respect. The kind born not from spectacle, but from clarity. As he pulled the locker shut, another voice spoke up, quiet, sincere. "Took guts to step out like that," one of the guards said, "but it didn't look like it hurt you to do it." Gregory didn't hesitate, didn't turn. "It hurt more not to," he said simply. That was it. There was no debrief, no meeting, no punishment. Because those who understood, he hadn't broken protocol to defend ego. He had broken silence because it had been twisted into something ugly. Sometimes rules hold the world together. Other times, it takes one quiet step outside the line to remind people why the rules mattered in the first place. And that step, when taken with restraint, not rage, echoes further than any shouted command ever could. Have you ever witnessed someone break the rules? Not for pride, not for anger, but simply because silence had gone on long enough? Do you think true discipline is about staying inside the lines no matter what? Or knowing the exact moment when stepping out becomes a deeper form of duty? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't hold back. Stories like this often mean different things to different people, and your voice matters here. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button. It tells us we're on the right track. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss another story like this one. We upload daily. Know someone who thinks silence is always strength, or someone who believes strength comes with knowing when to speak through action. Share this video with them. Let the story travel. And if you're not done yet, don't worry. Our other Royal Guard stories should be appearing on your screen right now. Go ahead and watch those next. You'll see that there's more behind the red tunic than most people realize. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with a brand new story you won't want to miss. Until then, stay steady, stay silent, unless the moment demands otherwise.